Now, our guest, Douglas Kruger, is the only speaker from Africa to have won the Southern African Championships for public speaking, a record 5 times. He is also second-place world champion of public speaking, having competed in Reno, Nevada in 2004.
I really like Doug. I liked his style. It was very practical. He was easy to follow.
And he's funny. So he has good examples that make a mental picture that I remember.
It's given me a lot of good ideas for my business.
Douglas is the author of 3 books on the topics of public speaking, expert positioning, and leadership. As a professional speaker and trainer, he has presented his programs to dozens of prestigious organizations, including BMW, Alexander Forbes, and Revlon. Douglas Kruger is a media personality, having been featured on high-profile networks such as CNBC and Good Morning Africa. His leadership articles have been published in Entrepreneur, Sales Guru, and Forbes magazines.
His style is great. I mean, it's real personal. Very easy to listen to him, and there was enough humor in there that it kept my attention.
Very entertaining and engaging.
A lot of valuable content.
Very powerful, knowledgeable.
Awesome. It's just, I want to implement some of those things that he said.
Here today to teach you how to position yourself as an expert, please join me in welcoming Douglas Kruger. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for that warm, flattering introduction. That was very complimentary. And I'd like to start off with a statement, that is, positioning yourself as an industry expert can and will change the story of your life. For me, it goes like this. The area in which I was born, in which I grew up, is called Weltevreden Park in Rudderpoort. And it's a beautiful little area. Strubens Valley is one of the adjacent towns, and that's where they first discovered gold in South Africa. And it's a mix of people as well. You have your upper middle class families who are doing very well. You have your emerging families who are struggling a little bit financially but getting by. And then you had us. We were the odd ones out in our community. And when you're the family that struggles financially in any community, you're not aware of it when you're 9, 10 years old. But there are little subtle signs that start putting it into your subconscious, and you begin to realize that things are a little bit different for you. For me, it was the mail that would arrive every week. When you're 10 years old, the words final demand don't mean terribly much to you. However, the red lettering seems to make a bit of an impression. And if you're paying attention, you'll start to notice that every week as the mail arrives, they start to add more and more exclamation marks at the end of the words final demand. And that starts to get your attention. The letters grow bigger, redder, and more angry. Now, when you're living in a scenario like that, you have to find ways to keep yourself entertained, which is presumably why myself and my little sister exist in the first place. Once you've had the kids, you've got to find ways to entertain them. So this is what my dad did. He walked out into our backyard and took a look around to see what he had to work with. And he realized that next door to our house, in the adjacent property, there was a large tree with a branch hanging about 30 feet up in the air over into our property. And he thought to himself, right, rope swing. So this is what he did. He got hold of a small rock, and he put the rock into a sack. And he tied the sack shut with the end of a rope. And then what he did was he stood underneath the branch and hurled the rock over the branch to create this rope swing. When he regained consciousness, he had created what became a legendary rope swing in our neighborhood. And this thing was very different to what most people think of when you picture a backyard rope swing. We tend to think of perhaps a length of chain and hanging from a peach tree. And if you think about your average rope swing, it's probably an old car tire. And the kids will swing back and forth for about 5-10 minutes and then get bored with it and forget it completely. Ours was nothing like that. You see, for starters, you didn't sit in the tire. What you did was you held onto handlebars at the end of the rope. And then what you would do is you would run across the length of the yard. And when the rope took, your feet would swing out from under you, and you would swing up and over the roof of our house on this side. Then you'd come back down, run across the yard, and swing out over the telephone wires on that side. We had surprisingly few fatalities. And most of those were kids that nobody really missed anyway, so it wasn't really a big deal. One afternoon, my best friend finds me at school, And he walks up all excited and he says, Doug, I've asked my mom's permission. She said yes. Can I come round play on the rope swing? And I turned to him and I said, no. And I can't remember what excuse I made up, but I can to this day remember why I had to make up an excuse. You see, I knew that afternoon our local church was delivering a food basket to our home to keep our family going. And I didn't want my best friend to see that. And I can remember being 11, 12 years old and looking at these food baskets arriving with this mixture of emotions. On the one hand, you are so deeply grateful that there's someone out there who's willing to help your family. And on the other hand, you're so embarrassed that they have to. The thing, of course, that I'll never forget is because there's this large age gap between myself and my younger sister. Whenever these food baskets would arrive, they would always include a small box of baby formula. And I can remember being 12 years old and looking at that little box of baby formula and feeling just so vulnerable and thinking to myself, this is not what I want out of life. Now, fast forward a couple of years and I come out of high school. And I'm in this interesting situation because I'm living in an area where people are moderately well off, but I can't compete with them. I don't have the uncle who will take me into his business and welcome me into the family prosperity. My folks can't afford to buy me my first car or send me off to varsity. And you start rummaging around in your mind and asking yourself, what can I do with what I have? And in high school, we'd had a local Toastmasters group teach a little bit of public speaking. And it occurred to me that that's one great way to add something to your resume. Go and learn a bit of public speaking. It's a great soft skill, and perhaps that helps you to get a bit of momentum in life. So I joined this organization not knowing two things. The first one is that you can actually make a career out of public speaking. Nobody teaches that in schools. And the second thing that I wasn't aware of at the time is that they have a world championships for public speaking every single year. Has anyone here ever heard of a World Championships for public speaking? Yeah. Okay, great. In South Africa, I asked the same question people say, we've heard of the Rugby World Championships. It's not a known thing around the world. Nevertheless, I got involved in this group and I started competing at the various levels of competition. You have to go through 6 different levels of contest to get to the United States and compete in the finals. Now, while that was going on the one hand, something interesting started to happen on the other hand. I started to get people asking me things like, can we pay you money to come and speak for us? And there you are, 20, 21 years old, and the person who's a CEO of a corporation says, young man, may I give you some money? So what you've got to do is keep your face really straight and say, well, yes, you can. And afterwards you go home and you fall apart and you say, yay, fantastic. But it really started to dawn on me that a career was building up in the background almost by mistake, by default. Now, the dawn of thinking about expert positioning for me happened one afternoon after a few years competing at this World Championships. I'm sitting in my little office at home, and I received 2 phone calls back to back within 20 minutes of one another. Now, this doesn't happen to me every day, but this particular day, the phone rings the first time, and the person on the other side of the line is calling from a large multinational company. And it's an organization I've never marketed to, I've never called, and I have no prior contact with. And he uses an interesting phrase. He says, someone told me that you're the person to talk to. And you put the phone down, put the meeting in your diary, and you think, fantastic, new business, great, that's what every entrepreneur wants. 20 minutes later, the phone rings again. And another lady from a different company, large multinational that I have never marketed to, never contacted, with which I have no prior engagements, uses the same phrase. She says, someone told us that you're the person to talk to. And the second time I put the phone down, the mood in my little office had changed completely. It went from, yay, that's awesome, to, hold on a second, how did that happen? And perhaps more importantly, how do you make that happen again on purpose? And that to me was the genesis of thinking about how to position yourself as an expert in your industry. What I'd like to share with you today is the content, the ideas, the specific ways in which you can make that happen by design so that you can have them come to you. Folks, would you enjoy the idea of adding an extra zero to your annual income?
Yes.
And I do mean on the right-hand side. Well, there are a number of ways in which you can actually go about doing that, ways in which you can own your industry by positioning yourself as the logical expert, as the guiding light. And today I'd like to share some of those very practical ways with you. So the question becomes, why bother? What's in it for you? Because folks, to be perfectly honest with you, I am inviting you to do a great deal more work than is technically necessary to get by in your industry. You can even, to a simple extent, prosper in your industry without positioning yourself as an expert. So why is it worth going to this extra trouble? Well, I believe that there are 3 reasons why it is worth your while to position yourself as an expert. The first and perhaps most obvious one is financial. It radically changes the scale of your remuneration. Let's say that you have, as a simple example, a consultant coming into a large corporate company. And your consultant spends the week overhauling their internal business processes. And at the end of the week, he hands in his bill, and there are X number of zeros on the end. The next week, Richard Branson drops by and does a 45-minute presentation, and they add 3 more zeros. Is it because Branson worked harder? Is it because what he said was of greater value? The reality is, it's because he's Richard Branson. There is equity in being the iconic name in your industry. So the first one is financial. The second reason it's worth your while to position yourself as an expert is perhaps a little bit more noble. How many of you here are parents? Or in fact, raise your hand if there's a good chance that you might be a parent. Okay. You'll know how immensely rewarding it can be when you teach your child something that they didn't understand before. That moment when the penny drops and the lights go on, and suddenly they can do something that was out of their reach just a day ago. For the people who are not parents, perhaps you've mentored someone or taught someone something that they weren't able to do in the past. And you felt how incredibly richly rewarding it is to be a teacher, a mentor, a guide, a thought leader, someone who has the answers and who other people come to learn from. That's the second reason. And the third, and perhaps the most fascinating reason to position yourself as an expert, is that it radically overhauls how you go about your sales and marketing efforts. I'd like you to picture in your mind's eye a large crowd of people. Now, this crowd of people represents your potential market for the rest of your business life. So I'd like you to be very generous with the number of people that you picture. Picture an enormous crowd, stand them outside in the sun. Now, wherever you have a large crowd of people, you will always have an entrepreneur trying to make a quick buck. And in my mind, for some reason that I can never explain, I always picture a guy selling pies. And perhaps my imagination is just a little bit weird, but I picture him in a sort of medieval village costume. You know, he's got the little curly toes, and he's got the straps over his shoulder, and he's carrying a pile of steaming meat pies. And this is what he's doing. He's walking around the outskirts of the crowd, tapping people on the shoulder one by one. And as they turn around, he says, "Would you like to buy a pie?" And because of the sheer numbers of people, from time to time, one person says yes, and they hand over a coin, and he hands over a pie. To make another coin, our pie man has to tap another shoulder. And if our pie man goes home, his business model has come to an end. No more coins until he taps more shoulders. You don't want to be the pie man in your industry. So what's the alternative? In your mind's eye, gaze over the heads of the crowd. In the distance is a hillside, and halfway up the hillside is the guru. And the guru is the person that they have all assembled to listen to, not because he's selling anything, but because he has ideas, creative thought, input, visions about what can be for their futures. And for that reason, they come to the guru. That's who you want to be. You don't want to be the pie man in your industry. You want to be the guru. Or more simply stated, you don't want to have to go to them. You want them to come to you. Now, how do we practically go about actually making that happen? Well, that's what we are here to look into today. Let's start by asking ourselves, what is an expert? I'm not interested in dictionary definitions, and I don't want to get terribly technical. I reckon an expert exists at the intersection of three qualities, but you have to have all three working together, or you do not have an expert. Let's see if we can work out what they are. What is the one on the left-hand side, represented by the books? That's the most obvious. Knowledge. You cannot be an industry expert unless you know your stuff. You've got to be reading the publications, attending the events. You've got to know the names, the key players. You have to have the basic knowledge. If you're caught out not knowing the names, not knowing the big events, you're going to be seen as an amateur. It's very obvious. The one on top is perhaps a little bit more abstract, and in fact, it's the one that most people tend to miss. What do you reckon that one is? Brand, charisma, attraction. Let's put these all together. There's one term that I'm looking for. Something unique. Keep going. Somebody has said it. Personality. Personality. Knowledge, personality, and the last one is publicity. Knowledge, personality, publicity. Experts exist at the intersection of those three qualities. Take one of them out of the mix, and you don't have an expert. Let me give you an example. Every large corporate company has an example of the person who is missing personality. They have all the knowledge. Let's pick on IT for this one. To get to this person who has all the knowledge and all the folklore and understands all the systems and all the wiring, everything about this company, to get to his office, you've got to get into the elevator and go down to the third floor basement. When you get out into this murky, dark, and forgotten realm, the first thing you'll see is the VW Beetle that burnt out in the early 1970s and has been sitting there ever since. Keep going. We get to the office and it's marked, beware of the tiger, and that's crossed out. Under it, it says janitor, and that's crossed out. And behind that, it says IT department. That's the door. We'll find him there. Open the door, kick the pizza boxes out of the way, go past the cobwebs, and there at the back of the room, hiding in the gloom and staring at you like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, is this guy who has all the knowledge in the world, but does not know how to talk to human beings. Have you ever met this guy? It's like when you ask him a question, he doesn't seem to blink often enough. Or you'll ask him a question and you get that taskbar that says loading, loading, loading. What's sad about that is because of that one missing thing, this guy is not remunerated like an expert. At best, he's a specialist. Add the personality back into the mix and suddenly you have something quite substantial. Now, the gut reaction for most people when they hear personality is this. I'm not a big, brash, loud personality. So what do I do about that? Folks, I'd like to invite you to think about this one from a very authentic place. You don't need to change who you are. You simply need to show who you are. Knowledge, personality, publicity. There are a couple of things that experts do not have to be, and these are quite surprising because they seem counterintuitive to us. The first thing is they don't have to be academic. If you have a doctorate, congratulations to you. That is entry into an industry, but it doesn't make you an expert. It doesn't make you an icon. It doesn't make you the thought leader. In fact, in many different industries, the people at the absolute pinnacle of the profession do not even have university degrees. Academic thinking, while wonderful, and I love the pursuit of knowledge, and I have a degree, I think it's the least important thing in positioning yourself as an industry expert. There are other things that we need to do. Academic, that's the first thing an industry expert does not have to be. The second thing is formal. Formality can waste time. Sometimes the industry's leading experts are the ones who want to get to the real stuff very quickly. They don't want to hide behind formality and time-wasting things. They want to get to where the grit is. And in fact, in many ways, they are not euphemistic or politically correct. Sometimes the things that the industry leaders say are quite controversial. Why? Because the psychology of expert positioning says this: don't blend in, stand out. Stand out by design. Speak strong. Have a strong point of view in the things that you say. You are not necessarily there to please everyone. The things that we say are truth and they are hard-hitting. And sometimes that's very counterintuitive to us because we think to be an expert, I must be a buttoned-down, staid personality who is perfectly safe. That's what everybody else does. We're not trying to be everybody else. The third thing that experts don't have to be is industry stereotypes. What happens when people try to follow the industry stereotypes is that the thinking gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It becomes incestuous. We look at how everyone else in that industry is thinking and we try to copy it. If you try to copy the leading icon in your industry, the best you can hope to be is a pale comparison of. We don't want that. The best you could hope to be is 80% of what they are. What they are is because it is authentic to them. Now, of course, what tends to happen in most industries, everybody copies everybody else until the maverick comes along and blows that industry wide open. Then, of course, ironically, everyone starts to copy the maverick. To be the maverick doesn't mean that you have to do anything absolutely obscene or bizarre or crazy. It means that you have to bring who you are, because there isn't another one like that. 3 things that experts don't have to be. So, the meat of our presentation today, the main body of what we're going to talk about, is the 10 things that experts do differently. My belief is this: if you do 2 or 3 of these things, you will change your pay scale. If you do 4 or 5 of these things, you will change your place in the echelons of your industry. If you do 10 of these things, I would like to know where you're finding the time. This is almost buffet style. Because every industry is different, you probably won't be able to use all 10. But if you actually implement 4 or 5, they will change the story of your life. Let's jump into them. The first one is, experts earn in value and not in hours. Experts earn in value, not in hours. One of the things that was very difficult for me to get my head around, coming from a family that struggled financially, was the idea of charging a premium for what I do. Has anyone here ever struggled to express a high price with a straight face? Okay? Probably, yeah, few people around the room. This one was dreadfully hard for me to do. When you come from a background of struggling and scraping for every cent, to state a high price, a high premium for what you do is frankly embarrassing. In fact, I'd even use the word excruciating. And yet, of course, in the public consciousness, our price is so closely associated with our value. Let's take 2 different cars, and we will spec them out to the same level. Over here, you have a Toyota Corolla, and it has everything that you can get in a Toyota. Over here, you have a C-Class Mercedes-Benz, and they have exactly the same features. In South Africa, the difference in pricing between these two would be roughly 100,000 Rand in our currency. That's probably something like $10,000 in your currency. We're roughly 10 to 1. Now, what's the difference here? In both cases, you're looking at brands that are known for being reliable. The difference is in perceived quality. It's the perception around the brand. Experts make sure that they move up that continuum very quickly. I saw how this one worked in the strangest way. My little sister, I mentioned that there's a 12-year age gap between us. When she finished high school just a few years ago, I was very proud of her. To her final assembly, she took top art and top design student. And they actually had me around as the motivational speaker for that evening. And I sat on the stage and I watched her come up and get her little trophies and walk back down. I was so proud of her that afterwards I took her aside and I said, "Lauren, I want to be your first paying customer." And I said, "Look, I don't have a lot of money. I'll give you $1,000 for an original illustration that I can use in magazine articles and perhaps in one of my books." And her eyes went wide and her little jaw dropped and she said, "You and I have very different ideas about what is and what is not a lot of money." And I drove away from that meeting thinking, you know, it's actually so strange that she undervalues what she does, because there she's being publicly honored for her degree of expertise. And of course I thought to myself, well, it's because she's young. And then a second thought hit my brain and I said, no, it's not. You know what's going on here? It's this. The only way Lauren has ever earned money before is as a cameraman's assistant working at weddings on the weekend. And what would happen is she would carry bags for 4 or 5 hours. And she knew that if she carried 4 bags for 4 or 5 hours, she'd earn a couple of $100. And it occurred to her then that therefore 4 or 5 hours worth of carrying bags or doing original artwork must also be worth a couple of $100. Now when I say bucks, I'm not talking dollars, I'm talking our currency. It's a much smaller amount, I promise you. And I thought to myself, what's going on here is that she has made that mental link that keeps working class families in generational cycles of poverty. And it is the link between hours worked and coins earned. I believe to the core of my being that one idea keeps people poor. Because what happens is this. We are taught that to earn more money, you have to work more hours. So what do? We get our first job and we work as many hours as we can. We get to the end of the month and the debit orders start coming off and we're paying for house and car and family and health insurance. And eventually we realize we're not getting enough coins. So we go back to that thinking that was handed down to us all the way back from the Industrial Revolution. We say, all right, to get more coins, I have to work more hours. So what do? We go out and get a second job in the evenings so that we can put in more hours. That thinking will keep you poor. Would you agree that it is entirely possible to work backbreakingly hard your entire life and still die poor? Yes. Surprisingly easy to do. That's the difference. Experts earn in value and not in hours. They charge according to how much value they give to the client and never according to the number of hours that they work. There is the world of difference between those two. And as experts, we have to learn to speak in outcomes. I always love the idea of a bridge. You can't sell the pile of rubble, the metal that goes into constructing a bridge for hundreds of millions of dollars. However, you can sell commerce between two cities that were previously disconnected for hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's the difference. Most people tend to put the emphasis on the thing that they sell, the mechanism of delivery. I sell a paper book, I sell an audio CD, I sell a widget, I sell a... Do not emphasize the thing. Emphasize the value to the life of the human being who uses it. And that changes how we go about charging in our industry, and it changes our own perception of the value of our labor. So the very first thing that experts do differently, they earn in value and not in hours. The second thing experts do differently is that they study the best in a slightly unusual way. There's a wise Austrian philosopher by the name of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold has an interesting life story, and he's often held up as one of these icons of achievement. He moved to the United States to get involved in the world of bodybuilding, and at the time he said he was going to conquer the world of bodybuilding and be the best of the best. In an early movie called Pumping Iron, they interview him and they say, "What are you going to do after bodybuilding?" And he says, "I'm going to become the world's best actor." And in the 80s, he was the world's highest paid actor. And I kid you not, if you watch that video, they ask him, "What are you going to do after that?" And he says, "I'll probably go into politics and become a leader." Now that's phenomenal. But there's something that Arnold Schwarzenegger did that is very different to how most of us think. He was only 21 years old when he made the call to move from Austria to California. He hardly spoke a word of English at the time, so this was a big deal for him. His philosophy was this: I'm going to move to the United States in order to meet the world's top bodybuilders and study exactly what they do. I want to know how many sets they do, how many repetitions they do, not so that I can copy them, but so that I can top them. That's very different to how most of us think. Who's the top icon in your industry right now? Who's the person that you would most dearly love to emulate? Who's your personal hero? Have you ever thought about it on this scale, looked at that person and said, what does he or she do, down to the detail of it, so that I can do more? That is an incredible way to think. Experts study the best differently. They learn the numbers, they find out about the output, they study the technique, not to emulate, but to top. That's number 2. The third thing that experts do differently, they constantly produce. Experts are constant producers. They are always putting things out into the universe. And it begs the question, what should I produce? And the answer is, it doesn't actually matter. It's just important that you are producing something. Experts always have their mental factory lights blazing, and there are ideas and content coming out of them all the time. The best thing that you can do to position yourself as an expert in your industry is to write a book. Has anyone here ever considered doing that, or in fact done it? In fact, let's start with, who here has written a book about their industry? Okay, two hands in the entire auditorium, 3. Out of a group this big. When I asked who here wants to write a book, many more hands went up. My question to you is, how many more Decembers will pass you by without that book representing you out in the world? I'd like you to make yourself deeply unhappy on that score. Don't get to another December and not have that book to your name. It looks like a mountain when you begin. Sometimes it's not as hard as you think it's going to be. Start. Experts are constant producers. Let's say that the idea of a book is totally overwhelming to you. What is the absolute smallest thing that you can produce? It's tweets. It's sending out knowledge into the world. Somewhere between those two, of course, there's a happy medium. How about writing articles for industry publications? We're often surprised at how easy it is to get into industry publications. I know in my own country, lots of experts and even professional speakers are very intimidated about the idea of writing an article and sending it to a high-level publication. The internal thinking, the internal process goes like this. Who am I? You know, that's a big publication. It's Forbes, it's Entrepreneur, it's whatever your industry publication is. And I'm just this little practitioner. What do I have to give? It's actually as simple as this. If you know slightly more than someone else, you can teach. If you know just a little bit more than another human being, you can be a thought leader. What is the barrier to entry for thought leadership? It is up here. There is no formal qualification required. To be an industry thought leader, you have to have the guts to declare yourself one and start producing. Let's say that you put your first article together and you send it off to a publication and they say no. What have you lost? In fact, I like to look at it this way. Out of every 10 articles that I send to big publications, probably 3 or 4 of them actually make it into print or make it onto their website. But that's 3 or 4 instances of publicity that make a massive impact upon my career. And so what about the other 6 or 7 that didn't get through? I can reuse them somewhere else. Experts are constantly producing. Now, of course, when you think of a factory line and constantly pushing information out into the world, it also creates the idea that there's a vacuum on this side. It means you've got to be taking ideas in all the time. I try to do that myself in my industry. I am always reading what other people are writing about the world in which I operate. And I hope it's something that you're doing as well. Making sure that you're up to speed with the latest publications, reading the latest books. That one thing alone, most people in your industry don't do it. Do that one thing, and your level of thinking is already slightly ahead of the pack. Experts are constant producers. Now, how do you actually use that in a practical way? Let's take the world's simplest example. We have a shopping center, a mall. And on one side, we have a guy selling flowers at a stand. And you walk through the mall, past the videos and past all the kids, and you come out the other side. There's the competitor, also selling flowers on the other side of the mall. Here's the difference between the two. On this side, the guy selling flowers believes that his job is to hand over a bunch of flowers and receive a coin. But now the lady on this side of the mall has a completely different view of how to go about this. She believes that she's a thought leader in terms of all things to do with flowers. So when you arrive at her little stand, sure, you see the bunches of flowers, but there are also little pamphlets, simple little pamphlets, saying things like 4 ways to use flowers to beautify your home, 5 ways to use flowers at your wedding, 3 things that people do wrong with flowers at weddings. Do you think potential brides would want that information? Now, the difference there is that she is teaching her customers to use her by giving away free content, free ideas. She's becoming a thought leader simply by giving away ideas for free. Experts are constant producers. And the more you are seen in the various forums, the more your name is up in print and in magazines, the more they start coming to you. That wonderful dynamic starts to happen, where your name begins to appear at the end of the sentence. You know who you should talk to about that? That's what we want. What else do experts do differently? Number 4, experts earn accolades. What car are you looking at on the screen there? Bugatti Veyron. What accolade does that car enjoy?
Fastest production car.
Fastest production car in the world, yes. And shows like Top Gear on TV teach us that that car is produced and sold at a financial loss. Why on earth would you do a stupid thing like that? Well, they do it for the accolade. They do it for the bragging rights. They do it so that they can be the people who make the fastest production car in the world, and it's worth it to them. They have earned what I call an EST title. Fastest, biggest, greatest, slowest, smallest, anything that ends with EST gives you bragging rights. All right, sure, now we don't have Bugatti's kind of marketing power behind us. What can we do in our situation? Well, I have a friend who used this idea in the simplest way. It was so effective. He was based in Zimbabwe, just north of South Africa. And a number of years ago, Zimbabwe's economy utterly tanked. It fell through the floor. And while he was known as an expert and a speaker in Harare, in South Africa, he was absolutely nobody. No one had ever heard of him. So he moves from Zimbabwe to South Africa and he thinks, what do I do to become known? And he did this. He earned himself an EST title by design. You see, he went to the Guinness Book of World Records and he flipped through the pages trying to find the longest motivational speech ever delivered. And it turned out that that was something like 19 consecutive hours. So he set out to top it. And here's what he did. He called the speakers bureaus, he called the press, he called other speakers, because of course they talk about what's happening in their industry. He called potential clients and he set up this event and he topped the world record for the longest speech ever delivered. Now you have to imagine that at about 18, 19 hours in, it's not even English anymore. It's just gibberish. But nobody cares. It's like that thing about formal qualifications. It doesn't matter how well you did at school, it's the fact that you've got it. No one knows what he spoke about that day, but they do know that he made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. He only held the title for, gosh, it must have been a few months. And then somebody else from Sweden topped it, but it didn't matter because he had earned his title and made his splash. Here's my challenge to you. The world in which you operate, the chances are you've learnt the dynamics of it, what it is every single day. Has it become easy? Has it become systematized? If you had to think completely laterally and be truly creative, what could you do in your industry that no one has done before? It may not even require much financial investment. For him, it was just hard work and creativity. Bugatti. A little while ago, there was an American corporation that came out with something slightly faster. So the Bugatti engineers got together and speaking in German, they said, "This will never do." And they came out with the Bugatti Veyron Supersport RS Star Trek Quattro, whatever it is. And now once again, it is the fastest car in the world. They do it for the bragging rights. What could you do that would give you an EST title on purpose? Don't think academic. Think spectacular. What is the fifth thing that experts do differently? This one's a little tricky. Watch this. Experts know that appearance is everything, and so they appear. It's a tricksy little hobbit, that one. Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that it matters that you drive the Bentley or the Porsche. I'm not saying that it matters that you have the right zip code, or that everything that you wear has a fancy Italian title, or that you smell like things that can only be pronounced in French. None of that's truly important. What matters is the fact that you are seen in the right forums. Who here enjoys speaking in public? Yeah? Just a couple of hands around the room. They did a survey once where they asked people, what is your number one fear? Death came second. Public speaking topped the list. And yet public speaking, as has been the case in my own life story, is one of the single most powerful things that you can do to position yourself as an expert. Let's take a very simple example. If you go to a networking function, you're the pie man. You have to tap people on the shoulder one by one and hand over a business card and introduce yourself. But if you are the speaker on an industry agenda, you're the big name at one of the events, suddenly they come to you. You're the guru on the hillside and everybody wants to come and meet you afterwards. Speaking in public is immensely powerful. Now, it's not just speaking in public. It's using the media as well. Quick show of hands, who here has done a TV or radio interview related to their industry? That's an excellent number. I'm thrilled to see that. Wonderful. Once again, we tend to convince ourselves, who are we? Who am I that I should offer my ideas to the media? They can only say no. And the fascinating thing about the media is that it chews up content. All you have to do is offer them something that is of value to their listenership, their readership, their viewership. The chances are pretty good that you can get into your local media that way. And of course, media works in a hierarchy. You manage to make it into your local newspaper, and you've got more chance of making it into the regional newspaper. You get onto a local radio talk show, chances are quite good you can go to the national radio talk show. So you start at the smallest levels and you constantly produce and you get your ideas and your information out there. You're in all the right forums, and suddenly, once again, the pie man and guru dynamic starts to happen. You've started off by tapping them on the shoulder, but eventually they start coming to you and saying, would you write for our magazine? Would you be on our radio show? Would you be a consulting expert? We'd love to have you on our TV set. And it really does happen that way. You start off by offering, but eventually they come and ask it of you. But you have to be seen in all the right forums. Career advice that we're always given is, you need to know who all the key industry players are. Folks, I think it's more clever to make sure that all the key industry players know who you are. But it's not their job to find out. It's our job to position ourselves there so that they start coming to us. So that your name begins to appear at the end of the phrase, you know who you should talk to about that. Appearance is everything, and so experts appear. Number 6, experts use high-impact messaging. Experts use high-impact messaging. They are supremely good at making ideas come alive. Having the information is only half of our job. Making it come alive is the balance. One of the things that industry experts absolutely excel at is doing that. How many times have you been in a corporate presentation where the person walks in, starts their PowerPoint, turns their back on you, and says, as you can see on the first chart on the left-hand side, and reads solid wads of text at you for the next 45 minutes. And of course, you can read faster than what they can speak, so you've gotten to the bottom, and he's still halfway down reading it, and you're checking your watch, and you're playing games online. And the next thing they do is they say things like, as you can see in this graph, and I know you can't actually see it, but I'll tell you what's there. Why do you have the graph in the first place? And it's every communications blunder under the sun. Experts do things completely differently. They don't do death by PowerPoint. They don't do charts and graphs flicking in front of people's faces until they're sitting there saying, I must kill the Pope. They have ways of making their ideas come alive. Right, let's talk about how to be high impact in your communications. And let's assume that your competition are not being high impact. They're following all the rules, they're being politically correct, they're using all the corporate jargon, they are speaking jargonese. You can cut through their clutter by doing something different. I work with a charity group in South Africa called Ubuntu Mission, and they have the world's simplest business model, and it's a beautiful one. You see, what they do is they gather talented individuals from different spheres of life, and they get them to teach in poor communities free of charge. That's the whole business model. The gentleman who runs Ubuntu Mission is a close friend of mine. His name is Tony Cross, and he's about 15 years older than me. And Tony has started and sold a number of companies. He's done very well for himself. So this was his way of giving something back to our local community. Now, like all charities, Tony has to do a little bit of fundraising. Because you see, in South Africa, when we talk about poverty, it's often grinding poverty. You have people from poor communities attend these courses, and the first thing you have to do is feed them. You can't teach them until they have something in their stomachs. So Tony goes to large corporate companies around Johannesburg, and he does a little bit of fundraising. One day, he sits me down with his laptop, and he says, here's the PowerPoint presentation that I've put together. What do you think? And he opens it up, and worryingly, I see that for a 10-minute presentation, he's got 16 slides. And I think, we're already on the wrong track here. And he starts to go through the slides, and they have charts and graphs and little bars and squiggly lines that go up and down, showing poverty rates in South Africa and unemployment rates in South Africa, and mind-numbing amounts of detail about things that don't really have any impact. So Tony and I sat and we puzzled about how we could make this just a little bit stronger. And this is what we did. We took his mouse and we moved it down to where the PowerPoint presentation was. And we grabbed the entire presentation and we moved it across the screen to where the little dustbin is on the other side, the garbage bin. And then we let go and let God. And this is what we did. Instead of his slides, we replaced all of them, all of that information, with one story metaphor. And it went like this. Tony stands up in front of corporate audiences and he says, I want you to picture South Africa as a large glass building, and you and I are on the inside. We are where the energy is, where the industry is, where the money is circulating, where everything that is happening in this country is moving around. It's all happening where we are inside this glass building. Now, look out through the glass. What do you see? Outside on the street corners, you'll see people who are begging for money. If you look a little bit further, you'll see those who have just given up and are no longer trying. Look further than that, and you'll find the individuals who have formed themselves into gangs, and they're out killing and stealing and looting and raping. And at Ubuntu Mission, we're not interested in any of them. Our only interest is in the ones who have their hands pressed against the glass. The ones who are just outside and want to be a part of what we are part of, but don't know how to get here. And our sole mission in life is to extend a hand and help them in. That's his whole presentation. No facts, no charts, no graphs, no dots, no dashes, nothing but human impact. And it's all done using a simple metaphor. And if you think about it, it's very easy to do in terms of how you introduce your message to the world. I had an instance once where I was called into a corporate company where their chief financial officer, who I'd worked with in the past, was doing a roadshow. And his own staff threw up an insurrection. They said, "Sir, we love you dearly. But if you do that presentation in public, you are actually going to do brain damage to our clientele." It was charts and graphs and dots and dashes and squiggly lines and things that chief financial officers dearly love, but things that you can't actually unleash on real human beings. So I sat down with him and I said, I'm not financially minded, and I'm really not. I said, what are you trying to say? What's the heart and soul of it? He scratched his head for a second and he said, well, this time last year, we were going into the worst of the recession. Today, this year, we're actually coming out of the worst of it. And we know that our clientele were very nervous, but we've made some good decisions, and we want to tell them that we're actually doing quite well. So I said, perfect. Here's your metaphor. And this is what he did. He stands up in front of his audience and he says, this time last year, we were entering a darkened forest, and you were terrified. A year later, I can admit to you that I was every bit as scared as you were. But we knew that you were trusting us. So we dug deep. We pulled on over 100 years of our best financial knowledge, our resources, and our information. We took you by the hand. We led you through the forest in the direction that we thought was right. And I'm proud to tell you now that there is a glimmer of light through the trees. We are emerging from the worst of the darkness, and you did well to place your trust in us. And for that we thank you. And if you want the information, you can take all the handouts afterwards and crunch through the numbers and the charts and the graphs and so on. But there was not a single one up on the screen. It was about story, it was about impact, it was about human communication. That's what we need to do as experts. People will never remember your PowerPoint pie chart, but they will remember your story. If you touch them in the heart, touch the imagination. Speak in metaphors, speak in analogies, speak in stories. Stories are the medium of human communication. They're what gets through. Stories are the medium of human communication. There was a prize-winning advertisement on South African television a number of years ago. It's probably my favorite TV ad of all time. It's set in what looks like an old-world, rural Italian or Portuguese village. What happens is this. There's a little girl, about 4 or 5 years old, and in the first scene, some bullies are picking on her, bigger kids than her. And this little boy, who's about her age and much smaller than them, runs in and takes out the first bully. Then he gets the stuffing beaten out of him. After that, you see the same girl carrying her books home from school. And there he is, nose bleeding, hair scuffed, and he's picking up her books and he's carrying them for her. And there are 4 or 5 other scenes in which you see this little boy helping out this little girl against tremendous odds. And the voiceover says, "When I was very young, my dad taught me one simple lesson." And at this point in the visuals, the little boy and the little girl arrive at her house, and the mom opens the door, and she is a stunner. And the voiceover says, "Find something worth investing in and stick to it." It is my favorite TV ad of all time. It won countless awards in South Africa. Not a dot, not a dash, not a graph, not a chart, and this is a financial services company. Speaking human being. Absolutely genius. Experts own a framework. Experts own a framework. What is a framework? Well, it's really just this. It's your unique way of organizing and presenting your body of knowledge. It's how you wrap it all up together. It's your metaphor. It's your anchoring story. It's the thing people remember you for. In South Africa, for a number of years, I've been doing a speech called The Rules of Hamster Thinking. And the rules of hamster thinking are really about how big corporate companies get so hung up on the rules that they forget about the goals. It's basically about saying, how much red tape have you invited into your own life to the point where you've forgotten what the goals are? So after a couple of years of doing this presentation, I get a call from one of our chambers of commerce. And the lady on the other side of the line says, "Correct me if I'm wrong, but are you the hamster guy?" Now, I'm okay with that. Because if you remember the framework, you remember the person. There's frameworks all around the world. So the question, of course, then is, what is yours? Is there a way in which you can take your body of knowledge, your unique ideas, package them, and present them to the world? There are 2 things you can use frameworks to do. And the first one is to access a new market. Often, you don't have the justification to get into something big like a Forbes magazine or onto CNBC or any of the big brand names. Sometimes the framework alone is strong enough to get you that publicity. On television in South Africa, there is I think it's a Canadian-made show, but it's shown all around the world on Travel Channel, called Skinny Dip. Who here has watched the show Skinny Dip? Please don't leave me as the only person with my hand up. Wow. The premise of Skinny Dip is very simple. It's exactly what it sounds like. You see 3 young, beautiful women go to different destinations around the world. And they round up a bunch of locals. They do a half-hour trek, or the show itself is a half hour, of them trekking to a watering hole. They get to the watering hole, and in the last 30 seconds of the show, they drop their clothes, you see a little bit of cheek, and the credits roll, and it's over. But people watch the whole 29 and a half minutes to get to that last 30 seconds. And the genius of it is this. You can imagine the planning that went into making the show happen. These three girls sitting around a table. They're saying, we want to do a TV show. None of us has ever been a journalist. None of us has a formal qualification. None of us have even been outside of our country. How are we going to do this? And in my mind, I'm sure this is what happened. I reckon one of them said, you know what we should do? We should just take off all our clothes and go skinny dip. And I think they all laughed for a while. And after the laughter died off, there was that moment of thoughtful silence. And then one of them said, you know what? That's not a bad idea. And on the strength of the framework alone, these three young ladies were able to land an internationally syndicated television show with no prior experience and no academic qualifications. The strength of your framework, if it's novel enough, amusing enough, different enough, sufficiently unique, can help you to access new markets. Television producers, radio producers, editors look at it and go, that's kind of cool. We should have that person. The next thing you can use frameworks for is to keep on speaking to a market. Bodybuilding magazines have a unique challenge. Since the 1960s, in most cases, they have had to fill 150 pages every month on the topic of how to pick up and put down heavy stuff. How much can you possibly say about bodybuilding? What they've done is they've used frameworks to keep on giving content to their audiences, and you can do this too. Some homework again. Go and pick up something like Muscle and Fitness or Flex magazine, any of the big brands, and see how they put their articles together. You might flip through to the first article and it'll say something like the 10-ton workout. And if you're a 20-year-old guy, you look at that and you go, ooh, that's cool. And the premise of the 10-ton workout is that in 1 hour at the gym, collectively and accumulatively, you're going to pick up and put down 10 tons worth of metal. And if you're 20 years old, you go, I got to try that. And you read all the exercises that you do to do the 10-ton workout. Now, flip to the next article. The next article is the summer t-shirt workout. And if you're 20 years old, you look at that and you go, ooh, I got to try me some of that. And the summer t-shirt workout has as its premise, if you do these exercises, you'll have all the right rips and bulges and shredded parts to look great in your summer t-shirt. And they list all the exercises. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the exercises are exactly the same as the 10-ton workout. Now you flip another 10 pages and you get to German volume training. And if you're 20 years old, your gut reaction is, ooh, I got to try that. And if you read the exercises, you'll see that they are exactly the same as the summer t-shirt workout and the 10-ton workout. All they've done is they have cleverly repackaged and represented their ideas using different frameworks. What is your message to your buying target market? If you've written an article, congratulations. That's your first one out of 2,000 of the things. You don't have to have different things to say all the time. You just need different ways of packaging and presenting what you say. The better known your framework becomes, the more people say, you know who you should talk to about that? And your name starts to appear at the end of that sentence. Frameworks are incredibly powerful. The eighth thing that experts do differently. Experts add a unique signature to what they do. An amateur level operator in any industry will want in their heart and soul to replicate what everyone else does and to be like the top players. I'd love you to do something very different. I want you to look at ways in which you can be different to them. Think of it this way. Think of this metaphor. Whenever you buy a sports car, this is theoretical for me, I've never done it. The top sports cars, when you open the bonnet, on the engine, they will often have the signature of the person who put that engine together. Why? Well, it's to show exclusivity. It's to show that this is unique, it's premium, it's above and beyond. Such a simple example of this one out of my hometown in Johannesburg. We had an architect who started building houses, and on a whim, for no particular reason, he built his first house with a garden on the roof, just to do something different because he felt like it. The next time a customer went and visited him, they saw the photos of what he had built before, and they said, "That's kind of cool. Can you build a garden on our roof?" Then what happened is the local media found out that someone was building houses with roofs in this area, and it got into the local newspaper. Next thing, it gets onto a national television show called Top Billing, which is our top fashion and lifestyle premium living show, and he's the guy who builds gardens on roofs. Now, he can't do anything else. People want him to build gardens on roofs because that's something unusual, it's quirky, it is his unique signature. What's yours? Excellence is awesome, but beyond excellence lies customization. Because if everyone in your industry is trying to be excellent, well, then everyone's going to end up being exactly the same. Beyond excellence lies customization, your unique signature. Number 9, the 9th thing that experts do differently. Experts leave a trail of breadcrumbs. Experts leave a trail of breadcrumbs. It goes like this. If you go up onto the mountain and they follow, congratulations, you are a guru. If you go up onto the mountain and they do not follow, you are a lost hillbilly. To be a thought leader, to be a guru, to be an expert, you have to have people follow you. You have to have what Seth Godin calls tribes. You have to be the head of a group of people who like your style of thinking, who like your constant output, your production, your ideas, your thoughts. Now, I believe that there are 3 levels of breadcrumbs. The first and most obvious breadcrumb is a business card. It's saying, here are my details. If you want to find me, you can do it using this breadcrumb. Track me down. The second level of breadcrumb is the invitation to connect online. It's follow me on Twitter. It's connect with me on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever the case might be. It's go and check out the articles. It's go and do whatever the case might be. So that's the second level of breadcrumb. The third, and perhaps most interesting breadcrumb, is the offer of more. It's the answer to the question, why should they follow you? If you have to think about yourself in the shoes of your target market, what's in it for them? Why should they be your tribe? Why should they follow you? And the offer of more is where they go to get free value. The more you give away for free, the more the buying public will follow you. Give away your best thoughts, your best ideas, free of charge. That's the 9th thing that experts do. They leave a trail of breadcrumbs. And the 10th thing that experts do differently is champion a meaningful cause. I know that in South Africa and in Europe and in the UK, Dove, the beauty brand, have this campaign called Real Beauty. Do they have it here? Yeah? Okay. So you'd be familiar with that photo. Dove Real Beauty. You've probably seen the YouTube videos that Dove have put together, and it's absolutely genius, where they'll have a person draw a woman according to her own verbal description. Then they have the same artist draw the same woman according to her friend's verbal description. And in every case across the board, her own description of herself comes out slightly uglier than what she actually is. And in every case across the board, the friend's description comes out slightly more beautiful. And it's just interesting because it's about perceptions of beauty. And Dove are owning their industry by championing this cause. They're saying, forget the tiny mannequins and the runway models that no one can relate to and who look inherently unhealthy. Let's champion real beauty. And they own that space, and it's genius. Champion a cause. It's kind of like saying, instead of selling something, what can my brand believe in? What can I, as an expert, be known for? I saw an example of a person who did not understand their built-in cause. Again, on a UK television show called Mary, Queen of Shops. The premise behind Mary, Queen of Shops, is that Mary is a consultant, And she goes into failing stores in the UK and turns them around and makes them profitable. One day, she walks into a store for plus-sized ladies in central London, selling clothes for plus-sized women. And she discovers something fascinating about the owner. You see, the owner has two businesses. The one is running this clothing store, and the other one in the evening is teaching people at a gym. She is a gym instructor. Can you see the discord between the two? Now, what Mary discovered is that the owner of the store not only failed to see her built-in cause, she didn't like her own clientele. She watches as this lady welcomes people into the store like this. Hi, how you doing? Yeah, look, we've got this fashion over here that can help you to hide those unsightly bulges on the sides of your hips. And I see you've got a problem ankle over there, so let's see what we can do to cover that up and make it look less grotesque. Mary watches this and her jaw drops and her eyes go wide. And it takes her practically the entire duration of the show to explain to this lady that A, you don't insult your target market, but B, you have a built-in cause. You can be the thought leader unto plus-sized ladies all around London and the UK. You're not just handing over a flower and receiving a coin. You are not just handing over a garment in return for payment. You are the thought leader. And if you do it with caring, you can become the go-to person. You should be on radio shows all around London, on television shows all around London, talking about the right fashions to wear this season for plus-sized ladies. What to wear on elegant nights out, to the beach, to social functions, to this, to that, the latest colors, the latest. And the more you teach your market how to use you, the more you become the name at the end of that sentence. You know who you should talk to about that. But not only did she fundamentally fail to see the built-in cause in her store, she just insulted her target market. So here's the question for you. I'm not asking you what you sell. What is the associated human cause that you can champion? Something that is right next to what you sell. Something that is a logical link. Something that is a basic human need. Speak that language, and you'll sell more, ironically. Experts champion a cause. They become known as the moral and leading light for something. And it's always something to do with your industry. Again, a simple example from South Africa. We have a lady who writes and speaks on financial products. But now what she's done is she's come up with her own framework. And her framework is this: how to be anti-Cinderella in your financial kingdom for women. That's her framework, and she's known for it. And of course, people buy her products, but not because she's selling them, because she's the champion of a cause. What's yours? I was almost an expert. It is entirely possible to be technically gifted at what you do, to have the best premium product, to be the great and logical choice and still not be seen as an expert because we undo ourselves with certain behaviors. Here they are. The first way to be great at what you do, yet undo your expert reputation, is the circus car arrival. You go and see your client, and you open up the door, and the chip packets and the Coke cans fall out. And then 5 of your family members come out and sit in the foyer, and you say things like, "Can my Aunt Agatha just spend some time here? Don't worry, she won't destroy too many things while we meet." The circus car arrival. It's not about the quality of the car, it's about the perception, how you arrive. How about this one? There is also stealing the sugar. You go to an industry convention, and you're meeting all the top players, and you're shaking all the right hands, but you decide to take your Tupperware dish with you and put a couple of things aside and stick them into your bag so you can take them home for later. And you're losing the $100,000 deals for the sake of stealing the sugar, undoing yourself as an expert. There is also the spelling mistake. It's the videographer who is the best in the business. He takes the most beautiful, romantic wedding videos, but he misspells the bride's name on the title. And it doesn't matter what he does after that. You're out. The spelling mistake. Even if spelling is not a big, important part of what you do, it adds to the perception. It changes how people think of us. The next one is neglecting the ribbon. If you've ever bought a brand new car, I'm sure, like me, the thing you want most in the universe is that darn ribbon around the car when you arrive to pick it up. And the ribbon costs absolutely nothing. I mean, it's the least expensive part of the car. But neglect the ribbon, and suddenly there's no experience in buying that car. Ribbons can come in all sorts of shapes and forms. I walked into a clothing store just a little while ago, and I went to their more premium section to buy a relatively expensive shirt. And the lady behind the counter first compliments me on this great choice of shirts, sir. And I'm sure she would have done that if I'd chosen a horrific pair of socks. Nevertheless, she folds the shirt in front of me, wraps it up into beautiful packaging, then walks around the counter and presents it to me. At that point, it went from being a shirt to being a shirt. Neglecting the ribbon. Don't forget that for your customers, getting what you buy should be an experience. There's something special about it. Even for the simplest of commodities, make it come alive for them. How else do we undo ourselves as experts? Well, there's the peeling paint and there's the missing tooth. We sell top high-end products, but when you look at our building, everything is just a little bit old. The paint is peeling. You talk to the person at the front desk, and of course the front desk is the first representation of your brand. The tooth is missing. You know, things are looking a little amateurish. I went to an embassy just a couple of weeks ago, and I was going to go and apply to speak in another country in Africa. And the embassy building had peeling paint on the facade. Everything else about that nation was an awesome experience. But you know what my impression is? It's the peeling paint on their embassy. Don't undo your expertise for the simplest and stupidest of reasons. How else do we undo ourselves as experts? Gentlemen, there is one thing that our reputations cannot recover from, and that is two ladies standing together, speaking about us and using the word creepy. Hello, come sit on my knee. Okay? That cannot be a part of what we do. And the final one, the assumed prejudice. In South Africa, like many countries around the world, we still have issues around race. A while ago, our electric gate wasn't working, so we called a guy around to have it fixed. He stood next to me and made these deeply offensive racist jokes about the staff that he had brought with him who were working on my gate next to us, because he assumed that I shared his prejudice. I vote with my money. He will never return. Don't assume a shared prejudice. It is enough to undo you as an industry expert. A couple of questions to ask yourself. The first one, right now, where you're sitting, at this point in time, if you had to put a pause on your life, are you more pie man or guru? Are you having to do more cold calling, or are people starting to come to you? Friends, we are never one or the other. It is a continuum, and we tend to move back and forth between the 2 points, pie man and guru. We want to do everything in our power to keep moving along this continuum toward guru, to be the logical choice, the guiding light, the perceived icon. The next question is, why should they think of you? Is there a logical reason why your target market should think of your name right now? Have you done the things that put your name in lights? Are you the logical choice right now? And if not, what's the gap between where you are and that set of dynamics? The next one is, are you finding forums? Do you volunteer to speak at industry conventions? Are you offering your services, your ideas, your knowledge, your expertise to the local media and to the kind of media that your clients and your colleagues and peers would logically consume? The next one is, right now, if you have to think about the messages you put out into the world, are you doing facts or are you doing human ideas? Are you doing dots and dashes and charts and graphs, or are you telling stories and appealing to the human mind? Which have you been doing up to this point? What's your cause? What do you champion? What do you represent? When the media is putting something together and they say, you know who's good with that, you know who is the voice in that area of life, does your name come up? What's the next big thing in your industry? And are you waiting for it to happen Or are you brave enough to champion it yourself? Once again, if we look at the top players in the industry and try to be like them, the best we can ever be is 80% of what they are. What if the next big industry development was you? That one thing alone can make you the icon in your industry, can make you the go-to name. And finally, the last one. This is again one that I had to grapple with for a long time. Do you fundamentally believe that you can be the top name in your industry? Is that core belief there? We doubt ourselves. We waver. We go backwards and forwards emotionally, and we say, well, who am I? Who are you? You're a thinking human being with ideas, with visions, with thoughts about what the future can be. The only barrier to thought leadership exists up here. Give yourself permission. In fact, I like to think about it this way. Give yourself permission to fail as well. Arguably, the leading human fear is the fear of being embarrassed publicly. We don't like the idea of failing in public. I believe that to become an expert, you have to give yourself permission to fail gloriously, to go down in flames if necessary. In fact, if you remember the opening scene of the second Lord of the Rings movie, in which Gandalf the Wizard is falling down through space, clutching this fiery Balrog, this demon of the old world. If you're going to fail, fail like that. Go down in flames and fail gloriously, because you can be one of two people. You can be the person who arrives home that night, hair all messed up, clothing scuffed, beaten and bashed about by the world, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the person who tried, who was alive, gloriously alive for those few moments, and who knows that they put their heart and soul on the line. Or you can be the other option. The other option is the person whose hair is neat, whose clothes are fine, who sits in their office, who sits in their cubicle, who sits in their home, quiet, unscuffed, unmarked, dying on the inside. That's the other option. Give yourself permission to fail. Go one step further than that. Give others permission to laugh at you when you try and fail. That's fine. By doing so, you take the power, you take the impact out of that sense of, what if I try and I don't get it right? So what? Give them permission to laugh at you. Give yourself the leeway you need to try. Do you believe that it is possible? One final, irrefutable, own your industry principle. I believe this to the core of my being. If you ignore everything we have covered here today, if you take none of the knowledge, if you don't take any ideas and implement them, but you take this one core principle and you cling to it, I still believe you will own your industry. And that is simply this: out-care your competition. That can't be beaten. That has the kind of momentum and the kind of impact that is unstoppable. All of the top players in every industry, if you take the Michael Jacksons, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, the Stephen Kings, any top name, these people care deeply about what they do. The passion is there. And because they care about what they do, they find ways. They think deeply about what they do. They come up with new ideas. Stuff occurs to them because they are always fixating on what it is that they do. Out-care your competition, and you can own your industry. To be good at business, add knowledge. To be great at business, add theater. May God bless you as you own your industry.